Good evening and welcome to this Partners for Democracy special event. I'm Jim Trengrove. Thinking about Joe Biden this week, I was reminded of his speech just last month at the ceremony honoring the American soldiers who landed on Normandy Beach 80 years ago, members of the greatest generation. They showed their bravery. Many of them paid the ultimate sacrifice, and they saved democracy. But what struck me were President Biden's words about what's happening today. And I'll read here. Let us be the generation that when history is written about our time in 10, 20, 30, 50, 80 years from now, it will be said when the moment came, we met the moment, we stood strong, our alliances were made stronger, and we saved democracy in our time as well. And that, in a sense, is what we're doing here tonight. Teenagers, 20-year-olds, the same age as those who fought in World War II, are being asked to answer their call of duty. They don't have to travel overseas, they don't have to fight in a war, but they do have to vote. And if they do that in large numbers in November, we someday might look back at Generation Z and say, that was a pretty great generation as well. Tonight we'll be hearing from and talking about Gen Z and also about the creative efforts of TurnUp, an organization mobilizing young people to vote in November. I think you'll be persuaded to offer them your support, and you'll be given that opportunity. A couple of housekeeping chores here. We have questions during the evening. Please put them in the chat if you do. And this event is being recorded, so you'll be able to review this on our website in a day or so. And we are pleased that Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin has made time to be with us tonight. Roberta Baskin will introduce him. Roberta?
Hello, welcome Congressman Jamie Raskin. So good to see you. Thank you, thank you. And we're here to talk about young voters, but now there's also a question about who they'll be voting for. And we know there was a closed door meeting of House Democrats today discussing just what we've heard. The mood was pretty gloomy. So I just want to give you the opportunity before we go into the youth vote to say anything you wish to share on President Biden's candidacy.
Well, maybe could we save that for the end?
Sure.
Something might change now in the beginning.
Okay.
I'm speaking
I am really delighted to have you back and to talk about my favorite subject is how to engage young people. And we are living through this pivotal moment, political time in America's storied history. We've got 8 to 10 million young people who are eligible to vote in the next election, who are becoming eligible to vote. And I really want to have you talk a little bit about the Democracy Summer Fellows, which is an amazing program born in 2006, and the role that it plays in engaging high school and college age young people for all that it does.
Well, Roberta, thank you so much. I'm delighted to talk about Democracy Summer, and then we can, expand from there to talk generally about the youth vote in 2024 and mobilize young people. But so Democracy Summer was born in back in 2006 when I first got into politics, and I was running for the state Senate, and I was like the underdog of all underdogs because I was running against a 32-year incumbent who was the president pro tem of the Maryland State Senate and kind of the boss of our local political machine. But I was running because the incumbent had introduced legislation to dramatically expand the death penalty, and I'm a big opponent of the death penalty, had introduced a pro-Iraq war resolution, and I was very opposed to the Iraq war, had been blockading marriage equality and all this stuff. This is a Democrat, and so I said, I was going to go ahead and run. And my favorite story about that race is when I first announced, there was an article in the Washington Post quoting a pundit who said Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible. And 9 months later, he got 67% of the vote. And they had another article quoting a pundit.
And did young people deliver that for you?
Yeah.
Was that young people that made that happen? Impossible numbers?
Well, but when I won, there was another article in the newspaper quoting a pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable. So I went from impossible to inevitable in 9 months, because the pundits are never wrong. but
I think you mean the pundits are often wrong. And the
right,
pundits now are saying that young people are checked out.
exactly. So, and I like to tell the young people in Democracy Summer that in politics, nothing is impossible and nothing is inevitable. It's only possible through the democratic arts of education and organizing and mobilizing people for change. And so, but anyway, when I first announced, I was very eager to get all of my kids and all three of our kids and my nieces and nephews and like a dozen of them involved in the campaign. And it played a good role for me. And I'll tell you this one other story from when I first announced, because I laid out everything I wanted to do. We wanted to abolish the death penalty and pass marriage equality and pass major gun safety legislation, ban assault weapons. Like I went through the whole thing. And this woman came up to me and she said, Jamie, great speech. I loved your speech. But one thing, take out everything you got in there about gay marriage, because it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. And it makes you sound like you're really extreme, like you're not in the political center. And my three kids were right there watching this exchange. And so I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to offend her because I didn't have that many attendees at my kickoff rally, But I said, thank you for telling me that, because it makes me realize that it's not my ambition to be in the political center, which blows around with the wind. It's my ambition to be in the moral center,
Nice.
and
Yeah.
to bring the political center to us. And so, and I realized like I wouldn't have thought of it that way if my kids weren't watching, and I really wanted to get them involved. And so I talked to all my nieces and nephews, and they came to my opening kickoff, but I really wanted them to come and spend the whole summer there. And I remember my niece Maggie saying, well, what are we going to do? Put on our resume that we work for our uncle's losing state Senate campaign? And I said, no, first of all, we're not going to lose. But secondly, you're not just working on a campaign. You're going to be part of Democracy Summer. And I was, making it up as I went along. And she said, what's that? Like, well, we're going to have people come in and we're going to talk about the history of political and social change in the country and the struggle for democracy today and how you're part of it and the role that young people have played in the great civilizing movements of our history, like the Civil Rights Movement and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and SNCC and so on. And so anyway, they got them interested, and that was the beginning of Democracy Summer. Now that was back in 2006 where we had like 25 or 30 kids. This summer, we have more than 1,000 young people across America. We're in 45 states. We are embedded in 150 different campaigns, but we still have the seminars with historians like Tim Snyder, who just gave us one, great union lawyers and leaders. We just had Randy Weingarten yesterday, the president of the American Federation of Teachers. We have elected officials. We have great campaign strategists and fundraisers.
It is more than talk, though, that you're doing. What else are in terms of the youth action?
The talk's important because it's easy enough to say to young people, we want you to come out and knock on doors for us, but we want to have real conversation where we're teaching and we're learning from them too. So we have the conversations on Zoom, but then everybody is embedded with a campaign and everybody's knocking on doors and engaging with voters, registering voters, conducting campaign events, and we're all over the country now. And this is the campaign, as you were saying, Roberta, where young people not only can but will make the critical difference. I mean, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by more than 7 million votes back in 2020. I mean, it wasn't close. I mean, if you redistribute the votes in different ways, it could have been dangerous, but basically that's a pretty strong margin. But if we add another 8 or 10 million voters, young people who have no interest in what Donald Trump is selling in terms of climate denying, anti-environment, anti-gay, racist, immigrant bashing politics, those people are coming to us. And, regardless of whether it's Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or whoever, I mean, they're going to be voting for the party of democracy. and freedom.
It's almost right. It's almost like not about the people. It's about whether it's about voting for democracy or voting for fascism at this point, or maybe for, you know, royalty.
I mean, our focus is really on the social and political movements, the civilizing movements that have transformed America. It's not individual leaders. I mean, leadership is important, but fundamentally, it's about the movements that have transformed the country. And we've got to keep our eyes on the prize there. And that means we've got to study the history of these movements. And then we've got to look at, well, what are the movements and the campaigns that are critical in our time, right?
And what are those? What are the issues that you find that young people are most motivated by?
Well, I mean, there's some that they're naturally motivated by, then the ones I try to motivate them around myself. But I mean, you know, I mean, young people are coming in because of climate change very clearly, the cost of college very clearly, because of, you know, minimum wage and income inequality, the inaccessibility of affordable housing, all those things are there. But what I like to talk about is that the defense of democracy and democratic institutions is often characterized as sort of a static thing, that we're defending a set of existing practices and institutions. And what I want to argue is that democracy is always something in motion, that it's an unfolding process, right? I just finished making a speech. I'm here in Washington, D.C., where there's 713,000 tax-paying draftable American citizens who are the only residents of a national capital on planet Earth who are not represented in their own Congress,
right,
and have no voting representation, right? And when the Democrats controlled Congress in the 117th and last Congress, I was the floor leader for DC statehood, and we passed it. It didn't pass in the Senate, but we passed that. And I started by thanking the people of Washington, D.C. I said, you've got a bona fide, verifiable political grievance, unlike the Proud Boys and, the Ku Klux Klan, who came here with a phony grievance and beat the hell out of our police officers. But the people in D.C., they didn't come down and commit violence against the cops and against our government. They've done it the right way. They've applied for statehood. And the people in Puerto Rico, there are 3.5 million Americans in Puerto Rico who should be part of a state, and we need them as a state for the rest of America, like we need Washington, and we need a constitutional amendment on the right to vote. And we've got to stop the gerrymandering of our state and federal districts. And we need real campaign finance reform to try to overturn what the Supreme Court did in Citizens United, where they transformed every corporate treasury in America into a political slush fund for the CEOs to spend however they want. So democracy, it's not like we've got a perfect democracy or anything, but the democracy we've fought for, and the prior generations have struggled for, and we're not going to go back to a Jim Crow America or a monarchical America or an authoritarian fascist America, all these other different forms that Trump and MAGA are experimenting with today, and the Supreme Court is experimenting with. We're not going to go back there. We're going to keep moving forward, but it means we need the young generation. We really do. I mean, it's not an exaggeration. Like, we need young people in this fight. I mean,
to step into their leadership.
Well, that's right. And they've got a lot of stuff to talk about. For example, it's very obvious to them, not only the rights of LGBTQ people, but medical marijuana and legalization of marijuana and so on. Like, we need them leading. And they've had stuff to say about the war in Gaza and Palestinian human rights that have moved the Biden administration. And, it's funny to me to see, I've never seen a generation have so much impact, and yet they're frustrated. And they're like, well, I give up because we haven't totally turned everything around. I'm like, my God, you guys have had an amazing impact. And it's a generation that is beyond racism, and it's beyond anti-Semitism, and it's beyond misogyny and beyond homophobia. It's a little bit, being honest, a little bit beyond grammar too. And we got to work on your writing. So that's a personal quibble I've got. But you grew up,
I'm with you.
and tweeting and all that stuff. And a lot of people aren't using complete sentences these days. But look, it is a generation with some really extraordinary values and that understands things in a profound way, you know?
And
Anyway,
they do. I mean, it's about having a livable future for them. I mean, when you think about the difference in you know, how much Biden has done in terms of our climate emergency and
yes,
where we will be going with drill baby drill and a bribe of you know, give me $1 billion and I'll do what you want.
yeah.
Can you, just from your perspective, take the barometric pressure on what you think the major issues that will motivate young people to turn up at the polls in November?
Well, look, I mean, I'm of the mind that if our species were smarter, like if we had bigger brains,
And less destructive.
right, i.e. bigger brains, right? If like we were not so drawn to violence and war and hatred and so on. The only thing we'd all be working on now really would be climate change, because we are in civilizational emergency. I feel like the young people are really the only generation that get that in their gut, because they, you know, they see what it means to have record drought and record strength hurricanes and you know, 110 and 15 degree weather. When I was a kid, that was unfathomable. I mean, when there was 100 degrees somewhere, you'd read about it in the newspaper. Now,
And
like
Category 5 hurricanes, early in the season.
right? I mean,
Yes.
in Saudi
So
Arabia,
they get that. I totally agree with you, because I talk to young people about climate all the time, every day. But will they get it in terms of showing up, do you think,
well,
in November?
we got to ask them. But I tell you, I spend time with people of lots of different ages, and every age group has different things to recommend it. But the young people today really are visionary, and they're also extremely competent, of course, in terms of social media and the internet. And I just think when this generation gets focused on winning this election, like goodbye Donald Trump, MAGA, it's over. It's over. When, you know, when this generation really commits, it's over. And so I'm trying to do my little part with Democracy Summer. We got more than 1,000 kids all over the country, and they're registering people and they're talking to people and so on. But and look, tell the young people that you're talking to, I'll leave you with these two thoughts, okay? One, this is Joe Biden's last presidential election as a politician. It's your first election
and perhaps your last, depending on how you vote.
Yeah, right. And it could be our last easy election. It could be, you know, but we need you right now. And tell your brothers and sisters and your friends, okay? Because everybody says, well, what's the message? And we're not messaging right, and it's too complicated and all that stuff. And I say, okay, here's a very simple message. I've boiled it down for you. Everything that you need to know about voting is everything that you need to know about driving. If you want to go forward, you put it in D. And if you want to go backwards, you put it in R. Okay. If you don't want to go anywhere, keep it in neutral. So
okay, that's a great message to leave us with 119 days to go. We're grateful for your leadership, Congressman, and your courage in keeping our democracy from sliding into places that we don't want to go. So thank you so much.
My love and solidarity, and please go out and hang tough and register voters and make sure everybody's got a voter plan. Don't leave it up in the air. Get a specific plan, all right?
Is there any last minute thing that you want to say about Democracy Summer?
Oh, yeah,
in terms of how we can help? Or
you know, Biden, he legitimately won all those delegates. And if anybody's going to change their mind about where things are going, it's going to have to be him. So I'm trying to take it easy here, because I know people are freaking out about it, but this is a team sport, and regardless of who the pitcher is on any particular night, our team is going to win, and we got to keep everybody together. And we have such an amazing record of success with the Infrastructure Act, with Inflation Reduction Act, with lowering drug prices, and we're moving in the right direction. And that's the critical thing. So I think our question will be answered, obviously, by our convention in a month. We'll know and probably in a couple weeks. But you guys be the cool people and say, I'm standing on the platform and the program and the politics of this party and personalities, you know.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your joining us, Representative Raskin. And yeah, hope to see you again soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Back to you, Jim.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Roberta. Albert Medina is leads the communication team at CIRCLE, the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement at Tufts University. Alberto, if you've unmuted yourself, you've been following the young voters from 2016, 2018, 2020, 2022. You've been watching them emerge as a strong force. But what are you seeing in 2024 as compared to 4 years ago in the 2020 election when they turned out very strongly for Joe Biden?
Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction, Jim. Thanks to everybody for being here. I think it's my third time maybe speaking to Partners for Democracy, so always glad to be with you folks. I prepared some slides with just a couple of data points that I'd love to go through for a few minutes, and then I'm happy to chat.
Please do, sure.
And take some questions. So let me just quickly do that right now. And yeah, what I want to do is hopefully, bring in some data to really highlight, some of the things that Congressman Raskin was talking about. Maybe in some things, add some nuance or some other things that we can be thinking about. And yeah, I think it's really important when we talk about young people, young voters, to think about opportunities and potential, and also to be really clear-eyed about some of the challenges. And then the interesting part is that hopefully some of the challenges can turn into opportunities. Just for 30 seconds, really quickly about CIRCLE. We're a nonpartisan research center on youth civic learning and engagement that's based at Tufts University. We focus on providing rigorous, timely, accessible, and responsive research on not just on youth voting, on other aspects of youth participation, but also on civic education and other parts of this work that feed into how young people become ready to be voters and leaders and stewards of our democracy. And as Jim mentioned, we've been following young voters for a long time. CIRCLE is about 22 years old, and we've always done research on elections. And I'd like to think we've learned a few things about who young people are, what they care about, and what they need to really be full participants in democracy. And one of the things that we know from our research, and as Jim was also alluding to, is that it's been a pretty exciting time for young people's political participation and for their voter turnout specifically. We went from a couple of election cycles where youth turnout was really sort of down in the dumps and at some of the lowest levels that we had seen since the voting age was lowered to 18, to some really positive increases in 2018 and 2020, especially double-digit increases in youth voter turnout. And I think that really comes down to communities, institutions, parties, campaigns, and folks like you on this call really doing the work, the kind of work that I know Seb is doing, the kind of work that Congressman Raskin was talking about, reaching youth, talking to young people, registering them, etc. And I think our hope and what we're all working toward is making sure that trend line keeps going up for this year's presidential election. And we do have some indication that young people are indeed excited and likely, and well, maybe I shouldn't say excited, but that they are still planning to participate and to vote. So this data is from CIRCLE's poll of young people ages 18 to 34, which we released late last year. So it is a little bit older data, but I'm sharing it first of all because it's our poll. It's also, we do a nationally representative poll of over 2,000 young people, and we certainly believe that is a better way to get us a sense of where young people are at than a national poll that may only have a sample of a couple hundred young people with a margin of error of, you know, sometimes 9, 10 points. So a lot of the data that I'm going to be sharing is from that poll. And, you know, we saw that 57% of young people ages 18 to 34 told us that they are extremely likely to vote. Many other youth, you know, who said they probably will or are somewhat likely. But as usual with young voters, and one of the things that we focus on the most, really deep inequities by age. You know, the youngest and the newly eligible voters, which are always a concern because they need to get registered, to learn about you know, the election system. Of course, if they're in college, you know, they may be dealing with moving and all that stuff. But then also, you know, really concerning inequities by race and ethnicity and by college education. I mean, 25, 26 points difference in likelihood to vote between young people with college experience and without college experience. And as Jim and others know, something that I and Circle are always harping on is not forgetting about the young people who are not in college or haven't been in college. In terms of who young people are going to go vote for, again, this is slightly older data, and I think we've all seen all kinds of polls that say all kinds of different things about young people, and so some show, you know, Trump ahead with young people, and some show, you know, Biden ahead by 20 points with young people. But what I really want to highlight here, which I think is important, is first of all, the number of young people who you know, are undecided, and how that number is bigger among all youth than among those who already, you know, considered themselves extremely likely to vote, and especially again among that group of young people with no college experience. So again, a challenge there, but also an opportunity, because these are young people who, you know, still need to be talked to, still need information, you know, still need help making up their mind about what their decision should be, versus, you know, youth who are already consider themselves likely to vote, and as I said, that really correlates with college experience as well. And then as Roberta and Congressman Raskin were just talking about, you know, the issues that young people care about, we asked youth to pick their top 3 issues heading into the election, and far and away economic issues, and especially the cost of living and inflation, is, you know, as you can tell, by almost double of any other issue, the one that young people care about the most, probably the one that people of all ages care about the most. And I think this is really worth highlighting because there's so much attention on young people and social issues, right? On climate change, on gun violence prevention, on abortion access, etc. And you know, those issues are important to youth. They are in the top 5 here, as we can see. But you know, far and away, again, economic issues, jobs also, but the cost of living is what the majority of young people tell us is at the top of their mind as they're thinking about voting in 2024. Now, the really interesting thing is that those issue priorities don't always line up with likelihood to vote. And this is where it gets tricky. And as we think about, you know, what should we be talking to young people about? How should we be trying to reach them? You know, the young people who prioritize climate change, who prioritize abortion, who prioritize gun violence prevention, those young people, by and large, already consider themselves extremely likely to vote. And it's actually the youth who have those economic issues as their top priorities, that are not quite so sure that if they're going to vote, at least, you know, not at the same level as other youth. So I think this really speaks to the challenge that you know, I think arguably both campaigns have had to center the economy, and at least with young people, to make a case for why, you know, if you're concerned about the cost of living or about having a good paying job, you should turn out and vote in the election. Now, one of the things that, you know, we were also talking about is young people's impact, and this is the other huge opportunity, and then Congressman Raskin alluded to it. Circle produces this tool called the Youth Electoral Significance Index, or YESI for short. We rank the states and also the districts, but I'm showing the states here, where young people really have the potential to make a difference in the results in the election. It may not necessarily be that they're going to, you know, completely swing it one way or another, or that, you know, they're going to turn a state blue or red within one election cycle. But the places where we see where we have seen and project for 2024 that young people can have that impact. And it's interesting, you know, because we see traditional battlegrounds, right, like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, et cetera, but also, you know, some places that I think people in perhaps in both parties in both directions, you know, may have written off as a completely red state or blue state or what have you, you know, like Texas, like Florida. So what we do with this tool and is really highlight that young people are still in play, you know, in a lot of places and can have a huge impact even beyond the so-called traditional battlegrounds. And in the traditional battlegrounds, you know, they can be the big difference, as the congressman alluded to, in these incredibly close races that we've had, you know, statewide, and probably will have again in 2024. So those are some of the opportunities, right? Young people care about issues. Young people, you know, are interested in voting. They've been voting at a historically high rate. They have the potential to really decide elections. Now, what are some of the challenges? And I've noted three here that I think are really important for us to think about. Our poll found, and again, this was at the very end of last year, that less than 1 in 5 young people had already heard from a campaign or a political party, you know, about the election or about a particular political issue. And this is a constant challenge we find when it comes to young people, a lack of outreach, a lack of campaign contact. And even fewer had heard from local or community organizations, which is really key. We've found that this kind of outreach and contact beyond just hearing from, you know, an actual candidate or campaign can be really important, especially for young people who are not, you know, in college, who may be more connected to their, you know, their local youth group, right? And that may be their political home, as we like to call it. But also a lot of times these groups are the ones that, you know, have the trust of young people, already have connections with them, and are already really well positioned to help young people understand how the issues they care about, you know, and what's actually happening in their communities can connect to, you know, what they what and who they have a chance to vote for in the election. And, you know, with the relative lack of outreach comes a relative lack of registration. So we're actually working on some data right now that I'm sorry I can't share with you today, but look for it as early as next week, comparing where states are in terms of number of young people registered to vote, but comparing now to November, you know, 2020, when right before the last election, and, you know, nearly every state is far behind where they were in November 2020. Now, caveat, that is a somewhat uneven comparison, right? We're talking about July versus November, and we know that a lot of the heavy, you know, voter registration work will happen in the coming months, but it really highlights just how much that registration work is needed and how, you know, much we need to invest in youth voter registration, because otherwise, you know, states will not close those gaps before election day. And then finally, you know, as you saw in some of the previous data, and it's something that we talk about at Circle a lot, we do not have a fully equitable and representative democracy and electorate if we, you know, have historic youth voter turnout, but we still have these major inequalities by race, by education. There's a big urban-rural divide as well that we have data on. So, you know, I always say, as we're doing this work, talking to young people, registering young people, reaching out to young people, if we look around and we only see, you know, white faces, we only see college educated faces, we only see faces, you know, from you know, the cities and the suburbs, we are not just doing it wrong in a sort of ideological moral sense, but you know, we're not going to close the gaps that we need to close, and we're not going to significantly increase youth, you know, voter turnout and engagement, because you know, youth of color, non-college youth, rural youth, these are the groups of young people and the communities that really need outreach and support to participate in the election. So I promised I'd keep it quick so I can take some questions and we can have some conversations, but please do, you know, check out more of our research at circle.tufts.edu, at Civic Youth on pretty much all social media, and you can always reach us at circle@tufts.edu. And yeah, I'm happy to I know I've seen the chat popping off. I haven't been able to look, but I'll stop sharing my screen and take any questions from.
Well, Alberto, thank you for that. You know, one thing that popped out from your polling was talking about the engagement gap and educational needs. Of those non-voters, 42% say they feel unqualified to vote, as opposed to 11% who do vote, who say they feel unqualified. So 42% feel like, why should I vote? I don't feel qualified to vote. That's quite a there's room to be made up there. There's
Yeah, certainly. And you know, some of this is deep structural long-term work, excuse me, that needs to be done, you know, improving civic education, for example, which is another big part of our work. I mean, nobody should be graduating high school in the United States and feeling unqualified or unprepared to vote. So the fact that that's the case, I think, you know, really speaks to big changes that we need to make in that arena. But in the meantime, right, and thinking about this election, you know, I think a lot of this can be, if not completely solved, right, at least ameliorated by talking to young people, by offering them your support, your encouragement, you know, by listening to where they're starting from, right? If they're starting from a place of I don't know, of I'm not sure, you know, what can we do? And we as sometimes individuals, but also, you know, what can the local youth group do? What can, you know, the YMCA do? What can, you know, jobs, you know, employers can play a role. And we've sometimes worked with this group called Civic Alliance that helps employers, you know, give people time off for voting and all this stuff, but also, you know, help prepare folks. So yeah, I think it speaks to the fact that it's not just encouragement that young people need or excitement, but an actual support in helping them feel, hey, if there's something you feel like you don't know, I'm going to help you figure out, you know, where to get that knowledge, that information, so that you do feel qualified.
Yeah, and you know, one question from our friend Matt Schneider about are young people not motivated to vote by the threat to democracy? That doesn't seem to be a high issue. I don't know if I know, and I'll ask our student activists this question as well. But if you can just give me a quick answer on that before we go.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the polling that we've conducted and that we've seen, it usually does not rank incredibly highly as an issue for young people. And I think, you know, in part that speaks to the salience of these other issues. I also think it speaks to the fact that a lot of young people judge the health and strength of democracy by whether action is being taken on the issues that they care about, right? Rather than as a, you know, potentially more abstract thing. So yeah, I do think it speaks to, you know, the messaging there can maybe shift a little bit and needs to be different, because just saying to young people, you need to save democracy, you need to save democracy, does not always seem to resonate.
Right. Hey, Alberto, thank you so much. Look forward to having you back again at some point, and look forward to some new data on the Circle website. So thanks so much. I want to quickly, if I can do this. Yeah, this is our website, partnersfordemocracy.com, and you're going to be hearing from Zev Shapiro in a bit about TurnUp and what they're doing to motivate young voters, young people to register to vote and to get out to vote. And I think you're going to want to support them. So you can go to partnersfordemocracy.com and do that. In the meantime, I am now going to go to three of our student activist leaders, and Elizabeth, Safarino, and Julia, if you can all unmute yourselves. Julia Lewis will be a junior at American University. She's vice president of the Voters of AU here in the Washington, D.C. area. Safarino Dor will be a senior at Fort Valley State University in Georgia. He's a student athlete majoring in political science, former president of the school's Political Science Association, and a star volleyball player. And Elizabeth Brubaker will be a junior at Emory University. She's politically active on and off campus there. She's from Charlottesville and has an interesting summer internship at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office with Fami Willis. So I'd like to welcome all of you. Are you unmuted? I'd just like all of you to say hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Good. Good to see you. Safrina, let me start with you. From what you've been hearing so far today in this chat, and in conversations you've had with friends, with classmates, are you encouraged at all by you young people turning out for the 2024 election, or is there still a lot of work to do?
I am encouraged. I think that we see in this election, we see a rematch of 2020, but sort of with a different context. You know, back then we saw COVID, we saw the George Floyd riots, we saw everything going on around that context. And this time it's a little different. We aren't in all that social upheaval, but we still are facing issues like climate change, inflation, the economy. We have 2 wars going on right now. So I think a lot of those issues really get in the mind of young people, and it makes a lot of people wonder, just as they did in 2020, does my voice really count? But I think that as we see in the statistics provided by Alberto, that a lot of young people are noticing that they do have the ability to be able to make change. There's, as I said, 8 to 10 million of us. And we see that in swing states, especially, that those votes can have a big effect. And I think that as we go forward in this election and in this campaign, that young people will get more and more motivated to come out as it gets closer, as they see that the stakes are a lot higher than you may believe right now. But again, as it gets closer, I think that young people will come out just as they did in 2020.
Julia, are you? What is your view of the young electorate at this point, 4 months out before the election?
Yeah, I really agree with what Safrina said. I think, like he said, it's really interesting to compare the political climate amongst young people right now to what it was in 2020. I was very involved in the youth climate movement at that time, and so I was involved in a lot of conversations about voting rights, get out the vote, and I felt like the atmosphere amongst young people at that time was very hopeful. A lot of people felt like we can do this, Biden can win. People were terrified of a second Trump term, but we had just had this incredible summer of mobilization. People saw that their voices were being heard, and they were really motivated to get out in the streets and make that change happen. And from what I'm seeing in the conversations that I've been a part of lately, I'm not seeing that same level of hope and motivation right now, which is really scary. I think a lot of young people feel very disenfranchised, feel like neither candidate fully represents them. A lot of young voters of color don't see their faces represented, and that can be very, very hard to grapple with. I think in order to kind of shift this trend that we're seeing, I really liked what Representative Raskin said about how it's not about the individual leader, it's about what they stand for, the administration that they're going to lead, and the movements that they will either help or hinder. And so I think that's kind of where the conversation needs to be going now, not necessarily Trump or Biden, but what each of those individuals stand for, the people they're going to put in office, whether it's a family member or someone who's extremely qualified. And so I think that's going to be very, very important moving forward. I'm definitely nervous about the campaign that the Biden team is running. I'm very nervous about the polls that are being released, nervous about the headlines in the media, nervous about what I'm hearing from my own friends about how some of them don't want to vote or are, thinking about voting third party. And so I would say generally it's hard for me to feel inspired or hopeful about the election.
Good. Thank you, Julia. Elizabeth, at Emory University in Atlanta. We talked last week, and you were concerned that we had lost some young voters for 2024. They may come back, but and you raised the issue of Gaza, which does not seem to rank high on top issues, but it does there at Emory University.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. I think honestly, if you were to do the polling now, I would say that especially for the college educated youth, that the war in Gaza would rank high as an issue. For me, it's particularly concerning when you see that, the high youth turnout comes from those who are college educated and walking around like my college campus, the amount of friends I have who are politically engaged, who have worked for campaigns, who say that I will not vote. Morally, ethically, I cannot vote for Biden based on actions that have been taken is very, very scary for me. And of course, foreign policy is a fraction of what a president represents. But when this is the first time that our generation is in the position to vote for a president, when there is a massive world conflict going on, I think that puts us in an interesting position where we haven't confronted that before. You know, other generations have and have dealt with that. But we're dealing this the first time at an unfortunate moment. But I'm very nervous for the impacts of that and how the Biden administration has handled the conflict, as well as how they handled the protests that were happening across the country in just disenfranchising and making youth voters uninterested.
All right, Elizabeth, you say you've talked to people on campus, you've talked to people off campus in the greater Atlanta area there. What do you say when you hear them say, well, I'm not going to vote, or I'm just going to sit this one out? What kind of pitch do you make?
So there are kind of like a variety of different ways. And I think this is what makes it challenging, is I don't think it's one size fits all. For, my friends on the college campus, I can make pitches about, the Supreme Court. We've all read those decisions. That's something that we're all very passionate about, right? Your vote is not for Biden. It is for the Supreme Court. It is for policies. If I'm not able to budge someone with that, I think sometimes it can be, it's really, you want to say, well, if you don't vote for Biden, you're voting for Trump. But at the end of the day, that just kind of creates more of a barrier with the youth, right? We're devaluing their emphasis on this Gaza and their ethics and their morals. So another approach that I will try to take is, okay, don't vote for Biden, but vote for all of your other Democrats, vote down the ballot otherwise. And then I also do a lot of canvassing outside of Atlanta, or outside of Emory and the Atlanta community. And there with the youth that I meet, it tends to kind of be more of what you would imagine, like, I don't care. Is kind of more of the trend that I hear when I leave my campus. And for that, it's really, well, what do you care about? Okay, you care about making money. Okay, you care about, your rent, and kind of letting them lead the conversation and tell me what they care about. And then just kind of trying to frame that, their desires in the election, is kind of my pitch. But I think that there is like a lot of different approaches that you have to take based on the individual. And I know for a lot of people, the first jump is like, well, if you don't vote for Biden, that's a vote for Trump. And I think as we get closer to the election, that will work. But for right now, I think we need to make sure that we respect or try to understand some of the youth in their hesitancy to vote for Biden.
Julia, is the fact that Joe Biden is the candidate, is the presumptive nominee, I should say, he's got the delegate votes, is that turning off young voters?
Do you mean by his policies or his age?
His age, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say it's like the concern about his age is as big among young voters, at least the people we've talked to, especially in comparison to the Gaza issue, for example. I think the people I talk about who don't want to vote for Biden or are feeling very hopeless about the election, it has more to do with the policies, particularly the genocide in Gaza. I would say age is definitely a concern. It's almost laughable, frankly, the age of both candidates that are running, and, the debate that just happened, and all of that kind of thing. But I would say, at least from the people I've talked about in the conversations that I've had, it's more the policies, particularly about Gaza, and then general hopelessness that people's voices don't matter, votes won't count, etc.
Okay. And Saffarino, 4 months to go. What are you going to be doing to help drive out the vote between now and election day? You don't have volleyball until the second semester, so you've got some time on your hands. What are you going to be doing?
Yeah, well, actually this fall I'll be starting my master's program, public administration at the University of Georgia. So I'll be up in Athens, continuing a lot of the work that I was doing down at Fort Valley State in Middle Georgia, when it comes to registering more young people to vote, letting them know their rights when it comes to voting, teaching them how to go about researching the candidates. Because I think what we see a lot is that a lot of young voters are, frankly, unsure about what's going to happen. I think there's a lot of fear caused from not knowing which candidate is the right one to pick, whether they should go with Joe Biden, who's continually showing cognitive decline, or Donald Trump, who uses a lot of exaggerated language, but often isn't telling the truth. So a lot of voter education efforts on my campus and around the campus, and also just a lot of voter education so that people know what they're voting for.
Right, good. Hey, thanks all three of you. Enjoy your summer, and hopefully we can catch up down the road in a couple of months. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to go now to Zev Shapiro. Hello, Zev.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Great. And let me put the slide up again if I can. Hold on. There we go. This is the website where you can go to after you hear Zev speak or while he's speaking. You may want to support his efforts here. Zev, you started Turn Up in 2019, if I'm correct, and you were just starting at Harvard University. You just graduated from Harvard, and you are mobilizing voter registration and through 4 different initiatives. But first, quickly tell me about how did you get involved in all of this to begin with?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me, to you and the entire team, and really amazing remarks and presentations to follow. I'm going to do my best. But I first got involved when I was in 4th grade. I went to public school, and most of my friends would spend lunchtime complaining about the food, and nobody really liked the school lunch. So I recognized there was actually an issue of equal access to healthy food. Most of my friends were not able to bring lunch from home as I was. So we created a petition for a salad bar at my school, and it was very popular. We spoke before the school committee. Now there's one at every public school where I grew up. And that really taught me that young people can make a difference. When we get together, when we have intergenerational collaboration, we have the opportunity to make an impact. And so that's how I originally got involved. I was involved in many political campaigns after that. And then, as you described, started Turn Up, focusing on voter registration and turnout of young people. So, yeah.
So, Zev, you approach voter registration for young people with 4 initiatives, and you go after high school and community college students as well. Explain that.
That's right. So, but before I get to that, I just want to say a little bit about our targeting. Targeting is really important for us, and I think that you got a sense of the demographics and of young voters. But I think there is a missing piece, and that is, 2 things. One is we only focus our work specifically on swing states and districts. So all of our work is entirely in progressive areas within swing states and districts where young people can make the difference. The second thing that's really important is, it's not as obvious from the data, but the vast majority of young people are not registered to vote. So, for example, 18-year-olds, only 30% of 18-year-olds are actually registered to vote. So what accounts for the fact that young people are voting at lower rates, if you look at the data, is actually registration. It turns out that the vast majority of young people who are registered to vote actually do vote. So 86% of registered young people voted in 2020. It's been more than 75% in every presidential election since 2000. And so the turnout piece is really important, but it's very much linked to registration. And so that's why we focus on registration so heavily, because we know that registered young people vote. And the problem is that most young people, as you saw in some of this data, are never actually asked to register. Their schools don't ask them to register. The government often doesn't ask them. And so they don't have, they're not doing it mostly because nobody's actually showing them how, where they should be doing that. And so anyway, that's just a couple background pieces of information that lead to your question in terms of high schools and community colleges. These are very, very important places to actually ask young people to register. And when we're going into these places, no, we're never going into a place where someone has already asked a student to register. And so what we do is, we have 4 programs, but just starting with the first, because you asked, we hire students in high schools, in community colleges, in swing states to run voter registration drives. So we pay these students to do voter registration drives, and they get a lot of students registered within this program. In the spring semester of just this year, we registered 45,000 students, just having students paid to register other students in high schools. So that's the kind of impact that we have from focusing in these areas. We also run relational programs when we're not active physically at schools. We hire students to digitally remind their friends to register, both at the high school and community college level. We also work with this same method of relational organizing to empower turnout. We hire low propensity voters to register to remind their friends to vote, and also to register their friends in advance of the election. The third program that we're focused on is digital. So we're active on social media, through advertising, through working with influencers, and also through running giveaways. We've recently given away a car to somebody that registered, and using really social media actions in order to empower registration and turnout. And then the final program, which also, again, focuses on the same area, is our internship program. Over the past year, 4,000 students have gone through our internship program. We educate them in terms of civic engagement, and then we actually empower them to take action, phone banking, canvassing, text banking, and doing voter registration drives at their schools. So, those are our 4 programs: physically in high schools and community colleges, relationally, having students digitally register and turn out their friends, and then digitally on social media, where we're doing advertising and working with influencers. And then finally, we run a very intensive internship program where we actually have students educated and then out in the field doing grassroots organizing to register and turn out voters. So hopefully that answers your small question in sort of a bigger way and gives a sense of the programs that we run.
Okay, there's a question here about where are you based? You're a Cambridge, Massachusetts native, so you just went to the local school down the street.
That's right.
When you went to college. One thing that when we talked last week, and I asked about how you decide where to target your resources, and I said, which polling do you use? And you say, I don't necessarily use polling, I use betting odds. Can you explain that if you would?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple things. So first, there's very clear data in terms of where young people's votes matter. And so you can look at that, and there's very hard data. We get it from TargetSmart. There's also very clear data about what ideologies young people have. Are they progressive or not? And so we only target those key states where young people are progressive in the exact areas where they are progressive and register them to vote. In terms of the broader set of how we will target states, so a lot of it depends on where young people are active. But it is true that that many academic studies, particularly from Harvard, have demonstrated that betting odds are far more evident in terms of they're far more likely to predict outcomes of elections than polling. Most young people don't answer the phone, and they're very underrepresented in polls. So even overall, if you want to look at, where should you target your resources, and we do look at that when we're making recommendations as to the closest races, betting odds are pretty much proven to be much more likely to be accurate. So it's one part of it, but it's sort of the broader part of, okay, is it worth it to focus in, let's say, Florida compared to North Carolina? There's a pretty clear answer, and you can actually find that by looking at the odds.
Okay. And Zev, your organization does not specifically support candidates, correct?
That's correct. We're a fully 501c3 nonprofit. That's our only entity. And so all of your contributions, which we will be very grateful for, are tax deductible. And so for that reason, we're not able to support candidates. We're completely nonpartisan. We register anybody to vote. Obviously, we target our registrations where young people share our values, but we're not focusing on candidates, no.
Okay, and finally, let me ask you if, and I hope people watching this will support you, and I'll put up the slide again if I can find it. There it is. Oh, that's not it. Yeah, there it is. So Zev, between now and Election Day, what's going to be happening with TurnUp? Where's the money going to go to? What are your needs? And what's the ball game?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So on an organizational standpoint, we're focusing, picking up our registration activities again in mid-August at these key schools, and then focusing on turnout. So that's digitally, that's physically, that's with low propensity voters. One of the key areas that we'd like to expand to, and with your support, is we think this election is going to be a lot more critical for turnout, as many people have said, than in the past. We want to have 86% of registered young people vote, but I think it's going to be much harder this year for many reasons that folks mentioned. It's going to be high, but it's a question of how high it will be. And for that reason, we'd like to hire back all of the students that we have hired to do registration. We want them to actually remind those new registrants to vote. And so we're going to rehire those students, and that's something that we're doing that's new this cycle, because we think that the turnout piece is a lot more important. And so that's one of the key areas that your contributions will go to, because we think that that's really important, and it wasn't as important in the past.
Okay, and Zeb, just to make clear, your website is turnup.us?
That's correct.
Okay, I just put that in the chat. Hey, Zev, thanks so much. I didn't recognize the Charles River behind you,
This is
but
totally fake. Yeah.
okay, good. Okay, thanks. But thanks so much, and best of luck for you, and we'll be interested to hear from you in a couple of months and find out how things are going with registration. So
Well,
thanks.
thank you very much. I appreciate your generosity in having me and the generosity of your members as well.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right. Well, thank you so much. And now let's go to Ed Cohen for some closing thoughts. Ed, if you're unmuted, you can take it away.
Thanks, Jim, very much. And this was an extraordinary evening, I have to say. I was blown away by just about everybody who spoke. So I want to thank the panel. Jim, I want to thank you and Roberta for taking us through this evening's program. I have three things I want to say tonight, and I'll make it very quickly. I know all of us are very concerned about who the presidential candidate's going to be. We have not taken a position on that. It's above our pay grade. In fact, everything's above our pay grade. But the point here is that we need to set up the structure, the infrastructure for whoever our candidate is. If it's Joe Biden, great. If it's somebody else, great. It's out of my hands, but I do know that we got to get people registered. We need to get them to vote. And that's why people like Zev and his organization are really important. So please don't be dissuaded from participating in this election because we don't yet know who our candidate is. The second thing is that you should talk to your kids, you should talk to your grandkids, try to one-on-one conversations, maybe not from people of our vintage to people of their vintage is the most effective, but we've got experience. I, for one, have 50 years more experience than most kids in college. And so, you want to try to sell that to people and explain to them what is at stake and try to probe them as to what are the issues that are motivating them. Jamie put it the right way. This is a civilizing moment, and that's what they need to focus on, and not so much on personalities. The last thing I want to talk about is our next special event, which, believe it or not, is a week from Wednesday. And you'll be getting an invitation tomorrow. We didn't want to step on our own programming by sending it out early, but we're welcoming hang on here. I'm sorry, excuse me, Heather Cox Richardson, who many of you may know. I don't know if you are getting her blog. If you're not, you should be. She is extraordinary. She's a political historian who uses facts and history to make observations about contemporary American politics. And I think she's probably writing the best blog out there today. She is going to join us and a number of other groups where a number of groups like us are joining together and having a single program a week from tomorrow. She's going to talk about the importance of organizing, the importance of groups like us and the other groups, and her vision of what's going to happen with this election. As I say, I think she's the smartest person I know out there. Over 1.5 million people are reading her blog. If you don't get it, you should. So you'll be getting an email from us tomorrow if you're on our list with the link, the date, and the time. And at the end of that, these groups that are getting together have identified a number of House races. I told you in the beginning, we're going to start identifying specific races for contributions. This is a group that the number of groups who have organized or have done some research and identified a number of candidates for which we would recommend you support. Partners for Democracy, as the next few weeks progress, we'll be developing our own lists, and those lists will be refined as the election comes. But for the first list, a week from tomorrow, along with Heather Cox Richardson. And with that, Jim and the panelists and Roberta and Congressman Raskin, who's not here, but I'm sure he's feeling the vibe. Thank you, and everybody have a wonderful evening, and don't get discouraged. We've got a long time to November. Thank you.